Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's imagine you are seeking a home during a housing crisis, one that's happening amid the post-war boom of the 1940s and 1950s. So what's on the market? It's the usual for then, houses made of brick or wood, maybe a Victorian or a Tudor-style build. But you're also seeing something different, something new. It comes in crates, and it's made entirely of metal.
Prefabricated is the word for such houses. The parts of the house are stamped out like airplane or automobile parts, crated, shipped, and set up at a price almost anyone can afford. Mass-produced houses, built and bought as you would buy a car, fit for either city or country way of life.
That advertisement from the 1950s is an example of this brave new world of housing, and one that would become famous through the Lustron home. With a government grant, the Lustron Corporation built a total of 2,500 homes out of panels of enameled steel, including several dozen assembled and inhabited in St. Louis. It was an experiment in housing that eventually collapsed in 1950. Today, less than 20 Lustron homes remain in St. Louis. But one of these homes has been recently restored. And to talk about that project and the history of the Lustron home, we're joined by Kaleb Higgins. Kaleb is a craftsman who has spent many hours restoring a Lustron home in South St. Louis to its post-war splendor. Kaleb, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We also have Nathan Wilber. Nathan is board president of ModernSTL, and that's the nonprofit that's hosting a special open house of this restored Lustron home later this month. Nathan, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's do a little bit of scene setting. The audio that we heard in the intro gives us a bit of oral background of the appeal of a Lustron home, but paint us a picture. What did a Lustron home look like? Nathan, give us a bit of a tour, maybe from the outside in.
Sure. So probably one of the most distinguishing features that you'll see on a Lustron is that you can see the panels that it's made of. So whereas a traditional home you might see, brick veneer or wood siding, Lustron you see square panels on the exterior, and you might notice that the roof is also metal, which at the time was pretty unusual.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kaleb, for your part, what, as you are working with one of these homes, were the perks of a Lustron home? And if you had to make a pitch today, what would your pitch be?
Well, it still has its original roof. It's 75 years old or 74 years old this year. And the fact that the roof is still good, the only leaks we ever had is when we installed an HVAC system. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty big sell when you consider how long roofs last. So my main pitch would be durability. Right. It is really a pretty strong house. The enamel stays good for a long time until you chip it. Then you have rusting problems, and then it's a whole other mess.
Yeah. So really, was affordability also? If you think about how much roofing costs.
Oh, absolutely. Or just anything in the house. Most everything that was in there was still original. We were missing some pieces, but all those pieces were still good. Now they needed Bondo and fixing and all that other stuff. But the house is essentially still the same house it was in 1950.
So the home itself is here in St. Louis. The Lustron Corporation, though, was in Columbus, Ohio. Did the homes actually come from there, Nathan?
Yes, they did. They had a pretty large manufacturing facility there with all of the machinery inside that they needed to assemble everything and get it ready. Most of the homes had around 3,000 parts and pieces, but they were able to put all of those onto one flatbed truck, send it out to wherever it was supposed to go.
Mm-hmm. And was that quality of its being made in the USA, was that part of the reason, the company and the U.S. government, too, entertained this idea that this prefabricated home made of metal, enameled steel, that it would be a good idea?
Yeah. The government recognized that there was a housing shortage, especially for all of the GIs that were returning. And so they were willing to work with anyone that could come up with a reasonable way to do a prefabricated home that they could get out to a lot of people quickly. And they were, really excited about what the Lustron company was going to be able to do.
Mm-hmm. So how good an idea did this end up being? And why is it that this housing experiment didn't make it any further than the 1950s?
Well, with Lustrons in particular, the startup process for this was enormous, getting the machinery in the factory set up to produce all of these homes, and then really to sell the idea to the public, was a challenge. And they really did push really hard. They did have a lot of orders. In the end, it just came down to the fact that they weren't able to meet the numbers in production that the government wanted them to.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so they could not meet demand.
They couldn't meet demand. They had, I think at the time of the closing of the factory in 1950, I think they still had like 20,000 outstanding orders for homes. They were just getting ready to turn a profit at that time too. But the government was ready to have them start paying their loans back, and it just wasn't going to work out.
Mm-hmm. Putting these homes together, Kaleb, I mean, what would it have required then to put that many pieces together in a way that would be durable, that wouldn't fall apart?
Honestly, it's only held together in most spots with two screws and tension. So you could put together an entire house with essentially a wrench and a screwdriver.
So when you started work on this house, what was it that you were noticing about it as a craftsman?
That it's like nothing else. It's really hard to figure out how to work on something like this because it's not necessarily like a car, but it kind of is. And it's not necessarily like an old refrigerator or stove, but it kind of is. And so just trying to figure out how it was assembled. They made these things that come with the house called erection guides that you would, open up and it would show you how each individual piece goes together. But even then learning how to read that is kind of difficult. It's not like a Lego, instruction. So it just took a while to figure out how everything went together and then how to reverse it so you could, fix the individual parts that were broken or missing.
So how similar is it to like IKEA directions?
I would say we come a little bit of a long way in direction, kind of like how we, show how things are assembled. It's not bad, but it doesn't really hold your hand in any way, shape, or form either.
Okay. So it would have required someone with your expertise and ability to read directions and actually produce something.
Or somebody who's really stubborn or hard-headed who just can push it through.
Now, Nathan, you talked a little bit about the outside of the home and these panels, these square panels that go together. But this home is an example of mid-century modernism. How is that the case?
So I think some of the things that really sort of show the trends towards a more modern interior in the Lustron have to be the built-ins. So the dining area has a built-in china cabinet with a pass-through to the kitchen. Primary bedroom typically had a built-in vanity system. Those kind of space-saving features that really emphasize how you use the house and how you can place furniture in it, I think really are kind of at the early stages of mid-century modernism and sort of those design thoughts.
Mm-hmm. And from any other design standpoint, is there something that makes the Lustron really interesting or remarkable?
Well, I think if you can imagine yourself at the time buying a new home like this, it really took a lot of the decision-making out of the process for the homeowner. You don't have to think about what color I'm going to paint the inside because it's already a color. And so, I think it probably made it easy and more approachable for people to not have to think about all those things.
And those colors, I think, is something we have seen a little bit of, because in the present day, there is a video game series called Fallout. You're nodding. Kaleb, tell me about what we see in Fallout and how that is either something that we do or don't see in this restoration.
I would say everything in the Fallout universe is I mean, it's really close to what the Lustron is. There's no hipped roofs on a Lustron, or at least not one that I've ever seen.
Hip roofs?
Yeah, so there's hipped roofs in the Fallout game.
I see.
So you have like weird little bays and stuff. But everything except for that, and then the kitchen. The kitchen is not the same in the Fallout universe as it is in the actual Lustron. Everything else, though, is really similar. I mean, you start the game building your character in the mirror of the bathroom. I completely restored that exact same mirror with the sconces that come off the side of it. So I spent a lot of time. I'm very intimate with that mirror.
And you actually run a YouTube channel,
Yes.
right, Kaleb? And that is where your work is documented. And part of that includes a very different kind of house, which is a Victorian mansion. So how is it that you got involved with this Lustron restoration to begin with?
Most of it's my father. My father has loved that house for a very, very long time. And it kind of came down to, who do you hire to fix this type of house? And the answer is, there really isn't anybody.
Yeah.
There's not a huge amount of them. They're weird. Car guys don't understand them. Carpenters don't understand them. So it falls into such a weird little niche that I basically is like, I can't find anybody. Can you help me? And so I more or less shut down my main gig, which is fixing my Victorian house, to work on this weird mid-century modern house.
What is an example, Kaleb, maybe of the leaps that you had to make in going from working on a Victorian home to this Lustron?
Well, I mean, I use so many old school tools and stuff in my Victorian stuff. So like I've been, making hot lime plaster with animal hair in it and putting it back on my brick to do it the authentic way. That way I know it's, like materials with like materials. And then the hop from that to here I am using a shim to pry apart, metal pieces. So I can get at, a part of the driveway where somebody hit the house with their car.
Oh, okay.
It's a completely different world. But there are similarities. Like, it is all problem solving, right? It's puzzles. So you have to figure out, okay, this is how this went together originally. It's really broken. How do I take it all apart, clean up all the pieces, and assemble it back in a way that looks like it would have when it was built originally?
Nathan, you've had the opportunity to see this home. And as the producer, Danny Wysentowski, and I were talking about this, he's the one who mentioned Fallout. I have not played it. But in watching a YouTube video of the game, it really made me think about the concept of uncanny valley, and how things that are so accurate in a way through technology, when you experience them, feel weird and almost kind of creepy. Did you have that experience at all, Nathan?
I didn't. This is actually the first Lustron I had ever been inside of. What kind of surprised me the most, I think, was just how spacious it feels overall. They're not large homes by any means, but the way that they've used the space makes a lot of sense. And so it doesn't feel like you're walking into like a tiny metal box. It feels like you're walking into a regular home.
No, the Lustron did end up being, a failure. Maybe not so much because of the design, but inability to keep up with the demand and also demands on paying back loans. But is there something to be learned, Nathan, from that particular attempt to address an issue that's as serious as a housing shortage?
I think so, and I think specifically the ideas behind prefabricated home building are still applicable today. There are still companies out there that are making prefab homes. It really is an efficient and effective way to build something. I think that, even though the Lustron may not have been a huge success, I think the continuation of prefabricated housing is still an important thing.
Are there any influences that the Lustron exerted on housing designs that came thereafter?
I think probably, not necessarily anything specifically, but just in a broader sense of kind of showing the American public there's different ways of building a house. It doesn't have to be the way that we've always done it before. And really, this particular time period, so much innovation in home building is going on. I think the Lustron really helped introduce some of that new technology into people's thought on how the house they wanted to live in should be.
We're speaking about a newly restored Lustron home and the history of these all-steel prefabricated forms of housing that briefly boomed in the years after World War II. We're talking with Nathan Wilber, the board president of the nonprofit ModernSTL, and Kaleb Higgins, who is the craftsman behind restoring that home. Nathan, you mentioned new technology. As we're talking about this home, people are going to walk in to tour it, Kaleb. But what are some of the quirks associated with an all-metal home that maybe don't do so well with the needs that we currently have today?
Well, Wi-Fi is definitely a bad one, and a cell phone service. It is essentially a Faraday cage, so signals in and out are really hard to get in and out. So when you're inside the home, you really have to step outside to make a cell phone call. We do have Wi-Fi in the home, but it does get weaker like directly outside of the walls. So, a lot of places you can go outside your front yard and use your Wi-Fi. Not so much in this home. And like Nathan said, it's not a big house, so it wouldn't be a distance problem. It is just a weird metal house in that regard. It is a bit louder. So obviously if you bang into a wall, it's like banging into a metal drum in some places. So, you have like the scrapes and the squeaks and stuff like that. But overall, I don't think it has too many downsides. Not as many as what I would think of when I first started the project anyways. It's pretty normal, actually.
Would you ever live in one?
I could live in that one.
Yeah.
But it is kind of weird going from my house, which is, 3,200 square feet to 1,200.
Right. So as you were doing this restoration, you took a lot of pains to make sure, you're describing how you came to make the paint, I guess, the enamel, to restore some of those spots that were rusted. But you also were paying a lot of attention to the detail that is going into sort of the way people would experience this house, like a television set.
Oh, absolutely. So
Right.
we want the technology and like the papers and everything else around there to be authentic. So the idea is the house is 1955. So when you turn on the television, you'll have, programming from 1955. The commercials, everything. We're trying to get programming sets so we know what is on when and trying to collect all the media for that. When you look at the coffee table, if you're there in November, well, it should be a November issue of Time Magazine for 1955 and Popular Mechanics and the things you would have around that day at that time that we can experience 55, then.
Why go that far? I mean, is this part of what your father has been dreaming about?
Well, yeah, it's kind of, so the idea is it's going to be an Airbnb, but it's an Airbnb as art, right? There is Lustrons you can go and tour. But we have gone through such lengths of like collecting all of the pieces because this house was pretty beat up. But we went all over the Midwest collecting pieces. I mean, this is at least 10 different Lustron houses kit bashed together into one to make essentially a perfect one. Even like tiny things like we went 2 hours to grab the shower towel bar.
Oh, right.
So, we went, we struggled and pushed really hard to be as authentic as we could to give a full experience of what this would have been when people were living in this house when it was originally built.
Nathan, is that part of the attraction of this home or the appeal of it? Is that it's not just about sort of putting together this building in a restoration, but like to make it feel like something out of 1955?
Yeah, it's very much putting the house and putting yourself in that time period and what it was like. I think that's really appealing to a lot of people. It's not something you get to experience with every other house that you visit. So really that kind of immersive experience, I think, is definitely a draw.
Are there any parallels to what we see with container homes, for example?
Yeah, I suppose you could draw some parallels there. Certainly you're working with a pre-manufactured container that's giving you a certain dimensions to work within and certain ways that you have to go about designing within that. So yeah, I could certainly see some parallels there.
So the ModernSTL tour of this house, Nathan, is November 24th, and that's next Sunday. And it is a tour that doesn't require tickets, but you're requesting RSVP
Yes.
Through the Facebook page for the event. And it looks like interest is very high. Is there anything that you're hoping visitors will take away from this particular tour?
Yeah, I think it's always great when we can get people into a space that they might not otherwise be able to get into. And so really just appreciating the uniqueness of the house and, kind of giving some thought about, like, as you said, is this a house you could live in? I think that's a big thing that people can take away from this, is to see what it would have been like to live in one of these homes and whether or not it's something that they might enjoy.
Mm-hmm. So Kaleb, you're the one who's brought this to fruition, right? What part of this restoration would you like folks to look at in order to appreciate, what a Lustron maybe was to families in the 1950s?
Well, I suppose, kind of look at it more or less as a whole, like how it was to cook in a 1950s kitchen, and how it is to use, the really cool angled cabinets that a Lustron had, or the pass-through built-in where you could pass your food in to the dining room, or, to look into the closets and see the different clothing that would have been available at the time, for different, so, we have one room set as a 15-year-old girl's room, we have the little brother's room, and then we have the parents' room. Kind of really, I guess, just see yourself in that place and time. Mm-hmm. It is a weird house, and with the Fallout stuff, there is a bit of deja vu when you walk in there, and if you've played the game, you're like, I recognize this place.
Oh, right.
So we're hoping, a few people get to recognize it in that way, and other people get to recognize it as this weird little time capsule that we've assembled.
Mm-hmm. Restoring this house took a lot of work, Kaleb.
Yeah.
If people who tour it see what you've done with this Lustron and then come knocking on your door to have you restore another one, how likely are you to accept it?
Absolutely not. No. I don't want to touch another one of these. I do think it was really interesting. My heart is definitely more towards Victorian millwork and things like that.
Right,
I have a huge appreciation for this house, and I absolutely love it. But I wouldn't want to touch another one. I mean, we ripped out a perfectly good bathroom in there with tiled floors and tiled walls. There was nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
We completely gutted that and took another house's bathroom and put the original bathroom back in. So we went to some really great lengths to make this work and feel correct.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now it's going to be something that people can enjoy on the tour, and maybe if they want to stay in this house to rent it for a time. Kaleb Higgins is the craftsman who worked to restore the Lustron home. He's been documenting his work on restoring homes overall and other things on his channel, The Second Empire Strikes Back. Nathan Wilber is board president of ModernSTL. Nathan and Kaleb, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STL PR app or wherever you get podcasts.